Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Bartholomew Bland, the Executive Director of the Lehman College Art Gallery at Lehman College, part of City University of New York. And I am very pleased to be joined today by Jorge Wellesley-Bourke, who is in our exhibition Sound Vision, with two pieces in our online gallery. And we're going to be speaking with Jorge today about his artistic career, about his background, being a native of Havana, and the role that music has played in his life. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today, Jorge.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
It's a real pleasure. Now, you mentioned that we're talking to you, you're in your studio right now, and you're based in New York at this time. Is that correct?
New Jersey. So
New
we
Jersey.
are like just across the river.
Are you in Hoboken right now?
It's this area is Union City.
Union City, very nice.
And right across the Port Authority area.
Very nice. How long have you been in New Jersey?
Now it's gonna be like 3 years.
It's quite,
or maybe more than 3 years.
Maybe 3 years. But you are a native of Cuba, right? And most of your formal education was in Havana, which I've been lucky to have been to just once for a very few days, but a very interesting metropolis to study in. When you think back to your childhood, I often ask this to artists, what is the first sort of visual image that you were sort of very taken with?
Wow, from my childhood. Well, yeah. Well, I was thinking these days, and when I was like 4 years old, that was my first approach into the art world. Mm-hmm. When I was 4 years old, because my parents they saw my interest in art, and they took me to the National Museum of Art. But in my childhood, I would say that it was pretty interesting, because my interest in art, it didn't have anything with my entire family, because they are all doctors and professionals in science area, you know. Okay. So I was kind of like isolated, very focusing or curious kid in art stuff. Mm-hmm. But I just grew up in the middle of a big family of professionals that doesn't have anything with art. But it was like I have a good memories from that.
And did you say that you were 4 years old when you were particularly you knew you were interested in art that early?
Yes.
That
was my first program or course that we have a bunch of kids in the National Museum of Art in Havana. It was my first approach.
And did you? I mean, were your parents supportive of your family supportive of this interest in art, or were you sort of? Did you feel pressure to go into one of the professions like law?
Kind of. Kind of. Yeah. The thing is that as they are all in the, my father is a mechanical engineer, and he's also a doctor in science in the university in Cuba, and my mother, she's a dentist, but all of them in my family, they are involved in this kind of career that doesn't have anything with art. But they saw very early in my interest that I was always like drawing in during the classes in the back side of my notebooks. Mm-hmm. So they noticed this very early, and they support that. They didn't want it that I take this path, but I have to say that they support my interest.
Wonderful. Now, and coming from a well-educated family, you went on and got your BFA at the Fine Arts Academy in Havana, which you graduated from when you were about, 19 or 20? Is that right?
Well, there are two schools in Cuba. San Alejandro, which is the academy
Mm-hmm.
where you graduate like a professional artist, because you have all the trainings in drawing, sculpture, painting, which is my career as a painter.
So a
And
true academy where you're practicing fine arts, yes.
yes, yes.
And
And
how?
after that, the university,
Yes.
which was between the 1999 and 2004.
Yeah, and you got your MFA, right? That's now, when you were in high school, were you given what you thought is good art teachers, or did you have an experience with art teachers that was encouraging at that time? What do you remember about your teachers during that period?
Well, I would say that the high school was that period where the academy was, because it was between I would say, 14 years old until I got 18. So it was 4 years. So it's kind of like the high school, yes.
Yeah.
And I remember many teachers in that school. They were really good, and they had training from the former Soviet Union, So there were like a big connection in the 80s with Cuban artists and the Soviet Union artists. And they were very good professors and teachers in painting, especially in drawing. Yes.
I agree. And when I'm thinking about that kind of Soviet Union influence, I mean, are you talking about professors who were doing sort of hyper realistic kind of social realism
Yes.
or
Very academical training? You know what I mean? It's like
right.
painting from the model, like a very classical training in art.
And were they down on sort of modernism, or did they view that as sort of a decadence, or was it part of the curriculum, or not so much?
Well, I had in the last years of in the high school, in the academy, the last years I remember one teacher of art history that she introduced us to the avant-garde, or the let's say the last century of the avant-garde art, the very first years of all the modernism.
So sort of a pre-World War One.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, but it was more like theoretical classes, but the training was more like classical. And after that is when I got to a university where it's a really good education in the postmodern art and all that stuff. And I got many teachers from philosophy and art history, but in a different way. It was more like a contemporary art and critiques and stuff like that.
Okay.
So it was different. That's different that time.
Of course. And then you come to the moment, which I think every artist has, we certainly do at Lehman, I know, where you graduate from the program and you have your MFA, and then you sort of turn around and you think, what am I what am I going to do now? I've been trained. And what was your next step? What were your thoughts about the time you were graduating?
It was exactly like that. When I graduated from ISA, which is Instituto Superior de Arte, I would say that translating that is like a higher institute of art, which is a university, right? When I graduated from ISA, it was like I got to this point where I thought that what I'm gonna do right now, because it's like the institution is like, especially in Cuba, is very like protective. Well, I would say, because you have like access to so many galleries, since everything in Cuba is part of the government, until the last, I would say, 10 years, because now we have like more private galleries in Havana. But 10 years or 15 years ago, there wasn't like that. And as a artist and a student artist, you are like you have a privilege to, or maybe like well seen to show in the institutions and galleries of the government. And I was like invited to Havana Bienal, which is the biggest event in Cuba. You know that.
I've been to it, yes.
Right, and after that, when you are by your own, and that's a really scary moment in your life as in your career, and then you have to start learning a new mechanism how to do or how to deal with the market, which is something new for a young artist. And yeah, it was scary. It's the only thing that I remember. It was really scary, and I was able to make to have my own studio, and yeah, I saw the entire life in front of me, and all my partners and colleagues like struggling how to deal with the new way of.
And you actually ended up teaching painting. You were a professor of painting at the institute.
There was yeah, exactly. You're right. That was one of my decisions to go back to the school and to the university, and I spent like, I don't know, 5-6 years like teaching the art and in the department of painting, but it was more like critiques. So we were like teaching the students to think about deeply in their own process. And yeah, it was really good because it was a really amazing experience how you can get that feedback from the students, and now you are like a young again.
Yeah, well, that was what I was going to say. Is between the years you had originally been there and then when you had gone back, had you seen the curriculum change very much? Was had the style of work changed in the period that you had been away from it? How did it match your sort of earlier memories?
It didn't change. I think it was like a whole process since I was in the first year in the university until my last year in Cuba.
Right. So you were there until 2012 teaching there. Is that right? Is that the year you came to the United States?
I came to the United States in 2014.
2014. Okay. All right. And what propelled you to do that?
What? Sorry,
what propelled you to decide to do that? To come to the United States?
Maybe it was like one visit that I had. I came to the United States first time in 2012 or 13, I think. I came to a really good exhibition that was made by the 8th floor in New York, and that was like a version of the exhibition that we made in Cuba in the middle of the Biennale. And I think the environment of the artists, I met a lot of our Cuban artists at that time here in this area, and I was like always imagine that New York was like the main focus in art in the world. So keeping that in mind, when I went back to my country, I just planned to come here and start all over again.
Yes.
I don't know why. It was like a challenge for me. And
that's a big change. That's a very big
change. A big change, but it was also not just as an artist. I was thinking more in my family too, because
and of course, there's quite a large diaspora of Cuban artists in New Jersey, particularly, isn't there? I've seen the Coral Gables Museum did that exhibition 10 on the Hudson, which I thought was very very well done. Did you? So you made this change. And then how was that shift reflected in your work? I mean, how do you think your work changed because of that move?
I think it has changed. Yes, that's a really good question that everyone asks when everyone realized that I changed my my
Mhm.
environment. And yes, I think I just realized like after 2 years living in the United States that my work changed a little bit because in the time when I was living in Cuba, I was affected more by the political scene, because in Cuba, this is subject. Subject in art is very particular, and you are always in contact with the news and the relationship between Cuba and the United States. I mean, the governments, and my work was always affected by that. And I also reflect in my work a lot of things that concern me in that time, and my work had a lot of influences of the propaganda. So at that time, I was yes, I was working more with the elements like billboards, stuff like that, because in Cuba is we didn't have like publicity or commercial advertising. We only had propaganda,
Yeah.
political propaganda. So that phenomenon was like very. I was very interested in that because I was talking about the repetition of those speeches in the public area, and
Mhm.
I translate that to my work, speaking more about the language and the the vacuum or the void space that there are in the language when you repeat a lot of
Now,
information all
yes,
the
the
time.
power
And
of
now it
repetition.
changed a lot.
Now, the power of repetition and the power of repetition in language is
Yes,
something that we see in your work. Is that the periods where that sort of started to emerge, that use of written language, combining that with the image? Uh,
exactly.
okay.
Those two words are from that time. Yeah,
Yes,
it
yes.
was part of one series that it was called "My Word Should Be." Is a
Yes, and that brings us to the pieces that I was familiar, that I was very intrigued by, that you were gracious enough to lend to our Sound Vision exhibition, which is from a whole group of an extended series, I guess, of works that all started with the repetition of the simple phrase, "My work should be." And we've shown at the beginning of this video and we'll show it again at the end, the images of that we selected for the exhibition, and two of these have very obvious musical relationships that you
exactly.
chose. So the first one that we might talk a little bit about is the one that says "My work should be," and then you've got the treble clef in there, sort of sensible.
Sensible.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting because that word, the whole series is not that many. It was just like 9 or 10 pieces,
Mm.
specifically that series. And the title is "My Word Should Be," and each word is like an adjective of how I would like my work be. So it's like every drawing is like a, for example, the sense is not sensible because the translation in Spanish is sensible, but that word in English is sensitive.
Sensitive or
It's
sensibility.
sensitive.
Yes, a sensitive sensibility. Yes.
Exactly. And so, for example, in that case, is my word should be sensitive, and the other one is like is contemporary, right? Yeah, it's that
Yes.
one. My word should be contemporary. So I'm just translating this because the whole series is in Spanish, right? And yeah,
And for that image, our viewers will see on the screen. You use the metronome
exactly.
that sort of had that sort of contemporary sense, but also the idea of the kind of pulse of the beat of being on the pulse of the moment. I thought it was an
Right,
interesting idea.
right. The idea for that series was like a combination more than the repetition. It was like the effect of combination of image and text. Because I used to work in the sense that for me the text, you can see a text as an image and vice versa, and you can read an image as a text, right? So I was combining these two sense, and if you the whole series is kind of a riddle. If you don't know what the object means in relation with the text, you are not going to have access to the meaning of that particular work. So you are not going to be able to understand the whole series, right? So it's tricky because it's in Spanish, but once you have the sense of that object, for example, the metronome, you just complete the function of that object with the word, right? And then you have a new sense, because the word you cannot read it because it's just two parts of them.
And so we're showing those two pieces, and you at least with the two, you get a relationship of, you're like, oh, that's what he's doing. But do you view it that, which I think when I first saw it was displayed on a grid, do you view that really as one piece with a bunch of component parts, or do you view them as autonomous and standing alone?
I think both. I showed for the first time the whole series in the Frost Museum in Miami.
Yes.
In FIU, in Florida International University, and I showed the whole series for the first time there, and then I show independently like 2 or 3 works in different exhibitions. So for me, because if you see just one work, then you're gonna like because of the title, then you're gonna like a hook to the whole idea. Then you are gonna ask for the rest of them. If you know that's part of the a whole series, then you're gonna ask for the rest, right?
See the rest, yeah.
But you can read it independently. I think it works in both ways. Yes. Mm-hmm. And for those 2 particular works, I was thinking more in the those kind of objects that surround the space of an artist when you are trying to come up with a whole like system because for me that series was like a system, because I employ like a lot of objects that from my culture. There's one very complicated to understand, which is like I don't know if you saw that one. It's a baseball ball. Mm-hmm. With the word semiotic.
Yes.
And that one is also very complicated for Cubans also, because it's not the ball, it's the material of the ball, or how my grandparents that generation called that kind of ball. So it's very complicated, but it has the culture and the memories from so many things that surround me that time.
Very personal. Well, but the one thing that came away from looking at that whole series was thinking about how much you want for your work and how much you want to give to your audience and
your public. Exactly. It's very ironical.
Yes, that was 6 years. I mean, it was around 2015 you were doing that series. Have your goals for your work changed since then in a marked way, do you think?
In a way, yes, but I think when I see my work as a whole thing, I just noticed that I still working with the language, but now it's in a different way, because I used to work with so many times with employing using the text itself. It was more like conceptual work when you see it that way. But now I'm more like focused on the image, but I'm still talking about the language and its problems or its issues itself.
But you're not necessarily foregrounding the written word as much as you were in the past. Is that right?
Right. Yes. Yes. For example, I don't know if you can see this.
I was going to say we are getting a preview. Your scale has certainly gotten very large. That's wonderful. What is
Right. Yeah.
what is the name of that
Okay.
piece?
That one is a new painting. Well, it's not that new, but it was the one of the first painting that I made when I came to New York, because when I moved from Miami to New York, I came with a residency from the Cuban Artist Fund, and it was in the Residency Unlimited. It's called. It's very well known, this residency. And then I was in the middle of a whole studio for me, and then I got nothing there, and I just have like canvas and paintings, and then paint, and then I start a new body of work. And it's this new series because if you see this, you're not gonna see any text in there, but believe it or not, that's a text. Because I start working with magnets that kids used to play, and I came up with the idea of converting a whole, let's say, text in a Morse code. And then when you create this, for example, this phrase is conversation with myself, which is the title of the whole series. And then when I compound this kind of code in Morse code, and you just touch this magnet, it creates this kind of chaos that you can see in the painting,
So
right?
the meaning becomes jumbled as you're
Exactly. So you have to believe me that there's a text in there. There's no other way that you can read that.
Exactly. So there's so you've made it more obscure, so that not the casual viewer would not necessarily recognize that.
Exactly. So when you see that, you are gonna have like you're gonna make like a connection with my previous works, because all of them are like let me show you here, are more like using the text, but now I'm more involved in this kind of relation with the text, but more from the point of view of the image. So where you're gonna see is like more like an abstraction, right?
Okay. Ah, yes, there we go.
So it's very realistic, but what you see is an abstraction. Because I do really like to work with this sense of this is another one.
Beautiful. The rendering and the detail is so fine.
Yeah, and also the thing is that in some of them there is my own reflection, so it makes sense the metaphor that is
it's part of you, and it's sort of
a conversation with myself. Let me turn this off. Sorry. Okay.
There you are. Yeah, so I will. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you was just to give me a little bit of reflection about music in your life, and your growing up and how music has impacted you personally, and maybe sort of filtered down into your work.
Well, I think, sorry, I would say that, for example, I remember my first approaches to like conceptual art. I remember one of my main influences was John Cage, for example.
Yeah.
So what I do really like it from this artist was the experiments with noise and the time and the silence also, because for me it has a lot of relation with the text itself. Also, he was one of the very risky artists that took the poems to another, I would say, another level. Also the music and it's his concerts.
Yes.
Concerts, I'm sorry. And I remember that he said that, for example, like so many people used to leave his concerts because they didn't understand what he was doing with the noise and hitting the piano and stuff like that. And he was like trying to understand how the time in music, you can like break that structure, right? So it was it was very alike for me in my investigations and my researches about the language and how the text behave itself and how people use the text to communicate. And it has a lot of relation with music because for me, I understand the music very close to how artists work with colors and shapes, right? Because in the sense of the notes that the musicians use for, build something like harmonic, right?
Yes.
So for me, he was one of the main influences that I had that time, and that's why I was very involved in those kind of conceptual works, right? And I use a lot of the repetition that John Cage used in his work also as an effect for my work.
Very
But
interesting.
I think music, as for many other artists, that's very important. Is I think it's like the used to move yourself to every day to go to your studio and focus on something, because music for me is like I would say that I cannot live with.
Do you listen to music to put yourself in the mood to create?
All the time. That's what I'm trying to say. It is like it depends. I always listen music, but every time it's different. I don't use something particular. I use to put in sometimes classical music, but for example, I do really like more like electronic music.
Oh.
So because because I think for the same effect, the repetition also is something that for some reason attracts me. It's like because for example, there is like a big influence in my work, like the pop art, maybe because of the repetition also, and because I used to work in the graphic design area too. So years ago, I was combining all this stuff: the conceptual art, the very classical conceptual art, and the pop art, and the text, and all that stuff makes blended with the music as a surrounding.
Hopefully, we'll make a harmonious composition. Yes, that's the bring it to something satisfactory. That's going to all those influences together.
Exactly, and as a Cuban, you cannot live without music. It's like sometimes when you try to avoid that, it's something that the environment affects you anyway.
It comes back into you.
I mean, it's crazy, but it's something that you try to avoid that, but you have to consume music all the time. But maybe because of the repetition, I was trying to get into something else that is not the tropical music that I used to listen in my country.
Right.
And that time, living in Cuba, I was trying to find different stuff and
so
listen
electronic
to
music
American rock and
electronic music, or that's very different. Give you a different thing. Well, thank you for talking to us today. I hope that when our pandemic is over, we will see you at Lehman for an in-person exhibition in the future. And
hopefully.
I appreciate you sharing all of your insights with us today. It was a real honor and a pleasure to have you in the exhibition.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to show you anything else because I just want you to come to my studio and see what I have here. It would be great if we come back to a normal,
Yes, I'll be making a studio visit to you in the not too distant future. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate that. Thanks.